that feeling you get when you look around a room and think to yourself, these are my people. They get it. They get me. We're in this together and it feels awesome. Well, if you don't know that feeling, I'm sorry, because that sucks. Because it's a pretty rad feeling. Anyway, what I'm describing is the feeling that's brought on by a well-run community. For lots of entrepreneurs and companies, building a community is paramount to their success. And with me in studio today is someone who built a community from 0 to over 300,000 in less than a year. Kevin Kermes is a creator, founder, advisor, former headhunter, veteran, career coach, father. Kevin, welcome to the show, my man. Woo!
Thank you.
Dude, it's good to have you here.
Good to be here, man.
All right, so it's customary to kick off the show with an opening clip. Me and my team picked this one for you.
2 words, entrepreneurship. It's not called living with your parents if you pay them rent.
Are me and Ty Lopez boys?
Did you get my Venmo, Dad? Good, I didn't send it. Ty Lopez parks in my garage.
Me? A drinking problem?
It's called networking.
So what if I don't know how to spell entrepreneur? You know what I do know how to spell? Tesla. T-E-S-T-L-A-W.
Being broke is a mindset.
My girlfriend's also an entrepreneur. She sells vitamins and supplements. Keyword sells. GNC. You heard of it? T-E-S.
Shout out to Trevor Wallace. I love that clip, but I picked it because there are a lot of influence out there.
Yeah.
They're offering courses on like community building or entrepreneurship or whatever. It's just straight up garbage and you can smell it a mile away. I feel like it sums up what we see. What are your thoughts on this, man?
Oh, man. How much time do we have? So, first of all, I've only got my perspective on being an entrepreneur, but math's kind of important. And and being functionally illiterate in your native language.
Just a little bit.
Moderately helpful too, right? So, but all joking aside, I particularly with social media, there's this dark rabbit hole that you can start going down pretty quickly as soon as you, click on something to look at how to write an ebook or find how to, all of a sudden become an 8-figure business owner in 60 seconds or less. There's a lot of good advice out there and there's a lot of shitty advice. I think that what's really important is that you approach all that stuff, first of all, understanding kind of who you are and what's going to work for you. And then you can weed through it. And, to kind of flip around the comment you made earlier about community, then you'll find your people. You'll find the right person. Because I've had some great people that I've worked with. I've had other ones that weren't so great, but the ones that weren't so great, when I'm really honest with myself, it's because I wasn't clear on not what I wanted to do, but like how I wanted to be and how I wanted to do it and show up.
Yeah.
Which is really important.
I think of my nephew who is like, gets caught up in videos like that and is messaging me and he's like, hey, I want to get into like mining Ethereum. And I'm like, dude, just focus on your job at Chipotle. Like, stop like worrying so much.
How many part-time Ethereum miners are there at Chipotle?
Probably a lot.
Probably a lot. All
right, I want to jump into our first segment here. When we were preparing for this interview, one of the things that caught my attention that we haven't heard a whole lot of on the show was that you served in the military. And I think that there might be some cool lessons that we can get from you about similarities between serving in the military and serving your network or serving your community. Maybe I'm onto something, maybe I'm not.
Not at all.
Is there anything that the military taught you?
Oh, man.
Nope, not at all.
So, look, I'm ridiculously grateful for the time that I was able to serve. I was in the infantry, and at that point in time, it was all men. So all the guys that I served with, it without a doubt gave me way more than I gave it. But it is a community, and there is a system, and it's a proven system by which you go through to become part of that community and filter in for people, and they filter out a little bit too. And the further you go along to other units, they're definitely filtering in, and as a byproduct of that, filtering out. But the things that I learned, man, shared values more than anything else, shared language, a culture and history that ties people together. They do an exceptionally good job at building the community that they're building, as well as remaining, at least in my experience at the time, very myopically focused on what you're there to do and do their best to remove all the other distractions. Case in point, healthcare, right? I was a deer in headlights when I got out with healthcare, because I was like, well, shit, if you need some, you just go down and they like give you your script and it's all free and you're good to go. And if you need like, whatever taken care of, you show up and they take care of it and it's all done. And then you get out and you're like, wait, you got to pay for this stuff now? and so many people, so many veterans that I hear talk about that, and to walk it back and realize, well, the whole reason that those things exist, the whole reason that all these things exist, and you see some larger organizations do this too, like where on campus they'll have a dry cleaner, daycare, all these things. It's so like, I'm going to remove all those distractions so you can focus on this. You can focus on accomplishing the tasks we want to put in front of you.
Do you think there's anything valuable from like somebody who's like, I want to build a community? Should they aim to try to eliminate any distractions for their members?
Wow, that's a really good question, right? Yes, and I think I believe that one of the key things that you want to do in a community, in again filtering in for people, is not the like-minded as much as it's the like-valued, and being able to get people into a community as quickly as possible to focus on a thing that one of my business partners, Matt, will always talk about, saying, is it a vitamin or is it a painkiller? And to identify that thing that's going to solve a certain pain or address that pain as quickly as possible, and then do it in the way that you do it, so you're also building the behaviors that you want inside that community. And at the same time, if that doesn't vibe with somebody, let them effortlessly just move on and opt out. Because it's really difficult to build a community when you're sitting here kind of pushing uphill, fighting gravity, whatever, with people who don't share your same values.
The other thing about the military is the cohesion and teamwork that I feel like they build. Is that something? How do we bring that more to professional communities?
Yeah, so it's a shared goal. It's one of the things that I think is interesting is I remember having a conversation years and years ago about this, and somebody kind of waxing philosophic about, people join because of America and they do their job because of patriotism. I'm like, no, it's pretty simple. You do your job because you don't want to look like a shitbag to the guy to the right and the left of you. And the reality is, like, when you've got the guys in the squad or team or whatever, like, you get your ass kicked if you're not showing up and doing the right thing, right? Like, it will solve itself pretty quickly. So I don't know of a lot of communities online in particular where that's going to happen. But if you are, case in point, if you're trying to build a community where you realize the more that we share and we kind of democratize information and what's working and why, and create a value around that, and people who do value in giving it as much as getting it, you can quickly filter out the people who don't share that, or they're just to take. It'll become pretty clear.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you think that folks make when they're trying to build a community?
I think the number one biggest one is that they focus on, okay, so if you build a community and you're going to build a community successfully, I think that my experience, again, is one that you're building something that you have some kind of passion and connection to, and maybe you see yourself in it, or it's something you wish you had. You've got some kind of emotional, intrinsic connection to it. And like so many things that when you end up marketing it and trying to attract people in, they'll be talking about the community, the community, the community. Two pieces on this. Number one, friend of mine, Ryan Lee, who's a super, super good guy, taught me years ago that people join for content, they stay for community. So when I think about it kind of like a restaurant. My ability to describe to you what the experience is like, from ambiance, setting, music, sound, service experience inside a restaurant I'm ill-equipped to do it. I mean, it's a Herculean lift for this brain to be able to do that and articulate it to you. To be able to get you to come into a restaurant based off that's going to be difficult. But if I can get you in off a meal or something that's going to bring you in to have you actually experience it and take all of that in, I never have to explain it again, because if it's your thing, you will definitely come back. And that's what I feel like community is. So you can bring people in, the audience that you're looking at, the problem that you know that you can solve for them. Going back to the sleazy thing, can you actually solve the problem? Have you solved the problem for yourself? Have you solved the problem for other people? If not, go out and do that first. Then you can go build your 7 million plus person community and make $1 bazillion and change the world, or whatever your motivation is. Mm-hmm. But do that. And then when you bring people in, get them into action as quickly as possible, because it's the difference between information and transformation. Because I don't know about you, like, I got a shitload of books sitting on my bookshelf at home, most of which I've never even read. All the information lies in there to change the thing that I bought in that moment on Amazon and then had the 48-hour disconnect before it shows up at my doorstep around whether am I really committed to solving that problem. And that's the transformation, the change in behavior, the change in beliefs, all those things that need to happen in order to make that thing a new reality for you.
The thing that stood out to me most in what you just said, and I am going to steal it from you, is...
Have at it. It's probably not mine to begin with. So.
is they join for the content, they stay for the community.
Shout out to you, Ryan Lee.
That's awesome, man. I love it. Okay, for the next half of our show, I want to change gears here and take an example of a real community that two of my friends are trying to build right now, ask you a couple of questions, and see how you might approach their community building efforts based off of some of the courses that I started taking through you over at Create Next Community. Ready to do it?
Let's go.
All right, man. Okay, so my friends Obed and Todd are inviting folks to their community. It's called Marketing on Easy Mode. And this is just their Apple Podcast page. We can see some of their most recent episodes. But essentially, what the idea is, like, they want to casually play video games online together while talking about marketing.
Okay.
All right. So one of the first topics that you cover in your course is defining who your ideal audience is. And you say figuring out a zone of genius. First of all, for our listeners, what is a zone of genius? And how do you think these guys can do that in a unique way?
Okay, so Zone of Genius, definitely not mine. In the book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, yep, is all, it's getting you, and phenomenal book, by the way, on focusing on what it is that, you know, the area in which you thrive, what is it that you do better than anybody else. My experience with it has been, which is really interesting, and it's interesting to watch this through other people when you walk them through it, is to find those things that you do so well and so effortlessly that you tend to discount it. Those things that somebody goes, oh my God, man, that was amazing. You're like, are you an idiot? Or like me, like, or just like, you just discount it. You discount it. You're like, I did this all day long for free. And it's like, that, if you can operate there, and they never even think about it as a possibility to operate there. So the first thing that comes up for me is like, I'm sitting here thinking about this, and as I'm playing with my 8-year-old son on his PS5, I'm like, do you want me to do this and have a deep conversation at the same time? Like, I'm screwed. I'm out of my element. Like, I would be an unmitigated disaster as a guest on that show if they're having people come in and do this, and that's the medium. But for them, if they are somehow or another getting into a more creative state, they're kind of freeing up their mind to access stuff and go to a place and all these things and add value and joy to themselves and others. And it may sound a little woo-woo and foofy, whatever. But the reality is if they're able to do that, that's awesome. Yeah. Because then their people want to do that. And if that's part of how they access and give other people access to their zone of genius, have at it, man. That's great. You may have a super niche down audience, but let's not get hung up on whether you got 1 million followers or whatever. If you go back to you've ever read Kevin Kelly's 1,000 True Followers?
I don't think I have.
Oh, no, dude. No. Okay. But seriously, kids at home, if you have not done it, Kevin Kelly, editor of Wired Magazine, wrote this article back 2008, 2001, 2008. I just wrote about this the other day. Come back to it all the time. 1,000 true followers, making the point, if you have 1,000 true followers that were, and this is just this is like the really high level 30,000 foot view. 1,000 true followers, 1,000 people once a year spend $100 with you, $100,000 a year, right? Bigger point being, you have 1,000 people who hang on your every word. You have 1,000 people who, and I may be butchering this in terms of paraphrasing it, but you have 1,000 people who are coming to you and trust you and you've developed a relationship with. Forget about whether you want to build a business online. I mean, in terms of your career, if you have 1,000 people that you go, hey, ready for my next evolution, ready for my next adventure, ready for my next opportunity, here's what I'm thinking about. Problem solved. What to me is most important about that is that if you work with filtering in for people that you're solving around something that is very specific, the ubiquity of the interwebs allows you to reach, the underwater Afghan creating, cat loving vegan. If that's your thing, man, if this is your thing, you can reach those people, you can find those people, but you've got to hold yourself deliberately to being able to communicate to them and in a way that would resonate with you.
I love that. And I think that hearing you just explain the zone of genius, I think these guys have found it. I think there's something here watching some of these episodes. They can effortlessly play video games and talk about this stuff. And I'm like,
it's awesome.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And like you said, I didn't even think about that. Like, it frees up a part of their brain to just relax and maybe dive even deeper into something and say things more eloquently than they would if they were, in front of a bunch of cameras and lights. So I think I like that, man. All right. Another technique that you talk about in your course is the XYZ technique. And can you just briefly explain what that is and how Todd and Obed might use it to hone in on their ideal audience a bit more?
Absolutely. This I got from Brendan Burchard years ago. XYZ is very simply put, I help X do or understand Y so that Z. In a perfect world, X is the audience you want to reach as they describe themselves. Y is that problem, going back to what one of my business partners, Matt, talks about, that painkiller problem, like that thing that, not the, I'd like to do that. I see people, and I'm guilty of this on my first stab at marketing and coming up with what it's going to be all about. I'll write something down, then I'll look at it and be like, do I wake up in a cold sweat at 2 a.m. over that? No. All right. So that's not the thing. Maybe it's a symptom of the thing, but what's the thing? So I help X, the audience, as they describe themselves, do or understand why, the problem they're solving for, so that Z is their most aspirational, ideal outcome state. So I'll give you an example, and then I'll layer one more thing onto it, which is another alphabet soup acronym that you can use. So one of the companies that I have, we provided high-end coaching for largely individuals who had 20 plus years experience who were struggling with their search and everything that comes along with that in terms of not being able to do some of the things that got them there to get them to where they want to go next. This company's Career Attraction. We helped from 2008 to 2020, called 2020, 2021, helped more than 16,000 clients through this process. So what we would say is we help high achievers land six-figure jobs that they love. What we would add in sometimes was, and people, so somebody, you read that, you hear that, you're like, me. Oh, but I bet I have to. And they're going to start coming up with their objections. So we would say without resumes, outdated networking techniques, or relying on recruiters. The importance that add-on you may or may not use, I would say for what I'm going to share next, it's less important to use that. Just using that XYZ and keeping it really tight. No doubt, first stab at this, whatever you write is going to be the longest run-on sentence that you've probably ever written about yourself in the history of being you. You need to apply what Dan Pink talks about, Man, these
Big
guys need to
fan.
be writing me. Oh, awesome dude. Dan Pink talks about "And to Sell is Human," which are the ABCs of selling, which are, it's not Glengarry Glen Ross, always be closing, coffees for closers, Alex Baldwin, it's awesome, by the way. It's attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. So attunement, tied into your audience, talking about, so what's going to happen inevitably with this when you finally come up with your XYZ statement and you have what you think is attuned, you're going to take it out and people are going to say, oh, so you mean this. And your ego is going to try like hell to explain your point of view. Don't, when you hear that a few times, adopt. The market is correcting you, assuming the person you're talking to is your audience, right? So that's attunement. Buoyancy, really easy. Something that I can give you and you can then take on to somebody else. This point was hammered home to me years ago when I was at a party with a close friend and their spouse, when asked what their husband did, said, I don't know, it's something with computers, he'd have to explain it to you. And this wasn't a function of, this is not maligning anybody for not understanding or not listening or not. I'm like, that dude has not equipped his biggest advocate in the world with his fucking message. I'm like, come on, seriously? Like, that is 100% on him. I've never had that conversation with him, by the way, because it's just an easy story to share. So that's the buoyancy thing. Like, somebody should be able to take this and be able to share it all the time and be like, oh, they're talking about that problem? Oh, you need to talk to. You need to go talk to this person. You need to go here. And then that's the clarity part. You don't need to explain it. So if when you're taking it out, you're getting that feedback, clean it up the way that your market talks. I can't tell you what our XYZ statement at Career Attraction looked like to begin with. I'm sure it was like super wordy, cumbersome, and polysyllabic at like every other word. And then it got totally cleaned up. And it got cleaned up by the market. And the market, there were clients and people that we served. Because the more people you serve and the more people you help, and then you start to come up with that subset of not just people you've helped and you've worked with, but like, oh, these are, to your point, like, these are my people.
Yeah.
First of all, you don't have to do this on your own. Go to them. I did this a year ago with some clients where I got on the phone. Well, actually, we got on Zoom. I said, I'd like to hit record. I know what it's like when we're working together and what my experience is. I want to hear it from you and I want to record it because somewhere in there is how I need to be explaining it to other people. It was life-changing. And my ego got a big pump that day too. Won't lie. But it made it so much easier because I was sitting there like going, oh my God, how do I explain this? I'm like, dude, what do you do? Why are you trying to figure this out when you've got other people who are your idea? Because I kept finding myself saying, like, if I could replicate these people, I'd be good to go.
I think one objection that I had was a similar one that you brought up right away, which was like, I don't want to think or talk about business while playing video games.
Yeah.
And I told that to Todd when he first approached me. I was like, that doesn't sound relaxing to me. And I was wondering how, maybe you don't know the answer, but like, how might they overcome that objection? Because you kind of had a similar one. You're like, I'm so focused on playing the video game, there's no way I can have an intelligent conversation.
Right, but I'll ask what I think is a better question. Am I your audience? I may not be your audience. And that's one of the things that we all do. We go to seek validation, right? We go to seek that external feedback to tell us, hey man, you're doing all right. Hey, this is great. This is fantastic. Go ask your mom. Your mom's going to tell you you're freaking amazing. Maybe. maybe your mom won't. You might want to dig into that. That might be why you're having some struggles. So anyway, my point in all that is that be careful about where you're asking for advice. It goes back to that internet marketing, hey, in 60 days or less, you'll have a G7 too. Is the person that is giving you the advice, is the person you're seeking the advice from, have they done what you want to do, and have they done it the way you want to do it? Here's an interesting thing about advice. Years ago, there are a couple of units that do things like this. The SAS is one, and then the Army has a special mission unit, that their selection process, which goes over an undisclosed amount of time, largely having people navigate from one point to another with different weight on their back and no time standard, right? So you get to the next point, nobody gives you any feedback. One of the squad, and this goes on and on and on. You don't know if you're going to go to 3 points one day or 5 points or whatever. Squadron commander there shared with me, this is back when I was in college, he was an alumni where I went to school, shared that it was upwards of 80% of people quit going through the selection process because they hadn't gotten any feedback when in fact they were doing just fine. And what they were looking for is the person that can go out there. One of the many things they're looking for, as I understand it, did not serve in this unit, is that they're looking for the person who can continue on and drive on in the absence of getting any feedback. It's really important for them because sometimes they're working in teams and sometimes they're working individually. So where I'm going with it is we all seek that feedback. And I'm not here to tell you that you shouldn't look for that feedback, but understand there's part of you that craves it. Mm-hmm. I don't psychologically know what part of us that is that craves it, but understand that you crave it. So just make sure that you're getting it from the right sources. Yeah. Because if we sit here and pontificate on why, like, well, let me tell you what they should, I'm going to tell you what you should change because that's not me. I'm not telling you. I have no idea if that is the thing for somebody. But if this is what you do and this is your model, and for a second I'm sitting here trying to think, okay, I'm you. Why would I create this? I create this because this was a valuable experience for me.
Yeah.
Go find the other people who will find that valuable. So think about it from that perspective, not trying to convince me that it's valuable, because you're not even going to convince me to play a video game.
Not even some Call of Duty, man?
No, sorry, man. Not happening.
All right, I like that, man. I think another lesson that you teach in your course is on topic selection. Can you walk us through some of the concepts used for deciding like what topics to choose? Because that's such a big part of starting a community is like, what am I actually going to present to people? What topics?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of reverse engineering. I think number one, starting with, if you go back to that zone of genius, starting with a problem that you know that you can solve right now. It can be really, really simple, and challenging you to think about and become aware of those problems that you can solve so effortlessly that you discount them. So some of the ways to find this, I'm not even sure, I probably don't even talk about this in the course. Some of the ways to go find them is to go back and talk to people you've worked with or worked for in the past. Hey, I'm curious, like, what problem or problems, if somebody came to you with them, would you immediately say, you need to call Kevin? What problem or problems would you come to me, would you think of, or do you think of when you think of when we work together? What have I done to make your life easier? This, for me, coming out of the military was a big eye-opener because I had all the stuff I was like, oh, I did this was so cool. Oh, this was really cool too. And then I went and I talked to commanders and they're like, oh, like if I just knew I could just give you whatever and I never had to worry about it being taken care of or not. And I was like, oh yeah, that might be valuable to somebody. So, because fundamentally what you're doing is you've already done these things that you're going to do in this community. And if you haven't, then you're on the fast path to being one of those douchebag marketers who's trying to sell something you've never done before, right? So don't want to be that, I'm assuming. If you are, you might be a bad human being. So if you're working back from things you've already done, go find those people who you've done it for and how they talk about it and what was valuable to them. You've got your worldview on what's valuable about it. These guys have got their worldview on what's valuable about it. There may be stuff in there with their podcast that has, exceptional value for people that they can't even see or they don't know or they discount because it's happening to them and they just assume like, well, that's just how life is, right?
I love that, and I'm going to start using that. By the way, the idea of like going to some of the people you've helped and being like, what when you think of me, what do you come to me for?
Yeah,
is it to make you laugh? Is it when you've got a problem with your relationship? What is it as our friendship or our working professional relationship? What are you like? Boom! I need to go to Travis to answer this question.
Yeah,
that's awesome, dude. That's really good advice.
And keep going with it. Like, okay, so tell me about that. Like, what did it look like when you? What did it look like before we talked and you had this problem? What did it look like after? What shifted for you? Just like continue to get curious. And if you can, record it, capture it. Don't paraphrase it because we start to. You've probably had this happen with podcasts, right? being a podcaster, there's the experience that you're having right now in the conversation. Then there's the experience you have if you can muster up the strength to listen to your own voice. I have a really hard time with this. And the experience you have as a participant listening, not a participant, as an onlooker, as a consumer listening to the podcast, because there's a different thing that's going on. It's the same thing for me, right? There's a different part of our brain. There's a different way that we're showing up and what we're having to think about in this moment. And then not just critiquing it and going back, but also going back and being like, oh shit, that makes me think about this. It becomes a kind of a catalyst or a muse for solving whatever problem it is that we need to solve. It's a medium by which your intuition, if you let it, can come up and help you solve for a problem in front of you.
The last part of this segment that I want to dive into that I really liked was a concept, the general plus painful. And you had this idea in your course called like general and painful rule. Do you mind explaining what that is, and what else do you suggest for folks who are trying to figure out what topics to talk about?
For sure. So this, for me, actually in putting the course together, this is something that occurred to me that had never occurred to me before. And it was all of this course that you're talking about is one that comes out of an ebook that we created years ago and when I say we, it was me and my wife. I pulled all the information together, and one Saturday afternoon, she's like, well, so what are you doing with this thing? I'm like, oh, I've got to put it together and I've got to organize it. And she's like, okay, we're sitting down and we're doing this and got it knocked out. So, but for Jill Kermes, this thing wouldn't exist. But what it is it was 70 plus tips to perfect the interview. That was the name of it. And it was a ton of feedback from a number of different experts on what their best interview tip was. And what I realized about that topic and why that topic works so well, because ultimately in right under or right over a year, we got more than 300,000 subscribers as a result of it. People opting in. I mean, if I spent any money on advertising back then, it was not much. I can't say it didn't, but it wasn't much. But here's the thing about the interview. And if you can find something like this in your topic, in your area of expertise, it's great. If you think about the process by which you go to find a job, there is figuring out what you want to do, figuring out your message, getting your resume together. If you do that, I don't think your resume really matters. LinkedIn, take it, leave it, whatever. Relationships, that does matter. Interviewing, negotiating, all of that. The one thing, in all my years as a headhunter, because I was a headhunter for about 10 years, one thing I have never seen, I've seen different pieces of that neglected, completely ignored, left out, never the interview. You can't get hired without an interview. You can't get hired by a former employer without an interview. There are people who are going to need to meet you. So you need to make sure that you not just show up to the interview to get the job and nail it and blah, 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 but show up to the interview to, in my opinion, make sure that you are representing the thing that you are going to provide, that you provide the experience, that you do all the things to set the conditions to be able to make sure that this is the right fit for you, right? Not just getting to yes, but figuring out, is this the right opportunity? So coming back to your question, that to me is something that is universal, that was going to get me the widest collection of people at the time. And then I could start to filter in from there on, are you the right fit for what our organization does? And some were and some weren't.
General to painful.
Yep.
All right. This is going to be our last segment. I call it, are you in or are you out? Usually I have a whiteboard. Today I forgot my whiteboard. We're going to go down a list of 4 statements, and you'll tell me if you're in on them, you're out on them, and then we'll pick one or two to figure out why you're in or out on.
Okay.
All right, the first one. Getting email subscribers is more valuable for online community building than getting social media followers. In. Why are you in?
Because email subscribers can lead you to more social media followers. And if I am looking for individuals who are going to carry my message forward, and I want to do that consistently, I can use my belief around email and social media is I'd rather use email to build social media than social media to build email, even though, this is just chicken and egg at the beginning stage, even though that cycle will just start feeding off of itself.
I agree with you. So number 2,
Good.
Video is the absolute best medium for distributing content for any and all online communities. Video is the absolute best medium for distributing content for any and all online communities. In or out?
I would say out.
Ooh, okay. Number 3, Gary Vee and Grant Cardone are the best community builders to ever exist for entrepreneurs and business owners.
Out.
And then the last one, community building is just new terminology for networking.
Out.
Why?
Because if you're going to think of them synonymously, and for me, what I'm going to do is instead of replacing networking with community building, I'm going to replace networking with relationship building, right? So if I'm looking to build relationships, I may need to amend this now that I've replaced that word. So if better put, let me clean that up and walk back for a second. If networking is the entry point for determining whether or not, so I've got 5 calls on my calendar each day or whatever, or a week, and out of that I determine the people that, hey, we really clicked, so I'm going to do my part to set the conditions for trying to develop a relationship. That would then lead to community. I wouldn't do that inside a community. I would be trying to do that outside the community, which may still be considered a community, some general population area out here where I'm not putting as much effort into it, so that when I get you inside a community where it's a more curated experience, I am going to show up and I'm going to put more of me into this, and I'm looking for more commitment from you. Then that happens inside a community. But out over here, not so much.
This has been awesome. This has been really helpful for me because this is what I'm doing at my company right now. So I appreciate you coming in. Kevin Kermes, you can find him on Twitter, LinkedIn. You can go check out kevinkermes.com, I think is your website.
That is it.
Dude, thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, man, thanks for having me.
Appreciate you, man. All right.
Appreciate it, dude.
We'll be back with another episode. Thanks for tuning in. Adios.
Thanks for listening to the Customer Engagement Lab, brought to you by PandaDoc. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or connect with us on LinkedIn. We love to hear from you and what you think of the show.